One of the more underappreciated laws of psychology when it comes to persuasion is congruence, or commitment and consistency. Humans will have a hard time doing anything unless it feels familiar. Our brain is a very resource-intensive organ. Whenever we go into a new situation, it requires our brain be on high alert for any potential dangers. This is brain intensive, and it's also emotionally uncomfortable, because if we mess up and we don't see a potential danger, we could land in big trouble. So we always defer to a familiar situation over an unfamiliar situation. This is why a lot of people get stuck in abusive relationships, because for whatever reason, they feel familiar. And they would rather do a familiar bad thing than an unfamiliar potentially good thing. Now, the reason this isn't a widely known about law of influence is because it's very hard to apply from the outside in. It's very hard to apply the law of commitment and consistency in a mass marketing standpoint. Mass marketing, you take a bunch of information outside the brains of your target and put them into the brains of your target. But if you're doing this, authority, social proof, scarcity, these can be leveraged with an outside-in message. You don't need to know anything about your target, about your potential customer, if you're using authority, social proof, or scarcity. But if you're going to leverage the law of commitment and consistency, which essentially drives most human behavior, you need to understand a little bit about the person you're talking to. You need to understand a little bit about your potential seduction or persuasion or sales target. Now, one good way to do this, one good way to leverage this law is when you're building up to the close, before you come up with a close, ask them about some of the best decisions they've made in the past. That will put them in the mindset of making a good decision. You can recall a few of their good decisions, and when you ask them to make another decision, this next decision, this close, will feel congruent with what they've done in the past. It will feel similar to what they've done in the past. The problem with this can be is if you're in any kind of persuasive conversation, they're going to feel intuitively that there's some kind of a close coming up. They're going to feel intuitively that you're going to ask them to do something that might not be completely familiar. You're going to ask them to buy a car. You're going to ask for the phone number. You're going to ask to go somewhere more private. And so their subconscious, their intuition is going to start being on high alert for this potential new unfamiliar thing that you're going to try to maybe impose on them. And when they start to suspect some unfamiliar future is coming, they're going to start to feel anxiety. And when we think we're going into an unfamiliar situation, when we have a good idea that we're going into an unfamiliar situation, our brain does the opposite. It looks for all the potential bad things that might happen by referencing all the memories where bad things happen. So we know what to look out for. This is the brain doing everything it can to play it safe and not get into trouble in the future. So if you ask them a question under this context where they're feeling that pre-close anxiety, what are some of the best decisions you've ever made? They might not remember anything. And that will make the situation worse, because if they can't remember making good decisions, they're not going to make another one. But you can get around this by asking a presuppositional question with a double bind. Now, what the heck is a presuppositional question? It's a question that implies something. In order to answer the question, they have to accept the presupposition within the question. For example, instead of saying, what is a specific good decision you've made in the past, you can say something like this. When you've made good decisions in the past, is it more like this or is it more like that? And when they consider which is the best answer, this is the double bind part, whichever they answer is going to stick them to the middle part, which presupposes they've made good decisions, even if they can't remember any specific decisions. That's the beauty of this technique. You can get them in the decision-making mindset without really needing to elicit a specific decision they've made in the past. So you can ask something like this. I got a question. I'm kind of curious about how you think, how you do things. You seem like a very interesting person. When you've made some of the best decisions in your life, are you the kind of person that makes decisions intuitively, or do you think about them more rationally? And they will choose one of these. And as soon as they start to even consider which of these is the best answer, they will accept the presupposition that they've made good decisions. Another either or question you could ask is, when you've made good decisions in your past, do you need to check with other people, or do you make them more independently? Now, their ego is going to want to compel them to say, I make decisions independently, because that makes us feel good. Whenever somebody asks us questions, we're going to answer them to make us look as good as we possibly can. So if you ask the question, when you've made some of the best decisions in your past, do you make them more independently, or do you need to check with other people? They're going to almost always say, oh, I make decisions independently, because that makes them sound like a boss. Another either-or question you can ask is, when you've made some of the most important decisions of your past, when you've made some of the best decisions in your past, some of the more risky decisions that some of your friends might not be able to make, when you've made those decisions and they've worked out well, how did your friends react? Were they surprised, or did they notice that this is just something about you that you always do? This question with these two either-or options has a lot baked into it. Number one, when you phrase it as when you've made big decisions, risky decisions that worked out well, that some of your friends might not have been able to make, that implies they have some hierarchical status compared to their friends, compared to their social group. That will make them feel really, really good. And then when you toss out the either-or, were your friends surprised, or did they notice this is just something about you? Either one of these is going to make their ego feel good. So this is kind of a covert invitation to flex their ego within the answer. Now, once you get 3 or 4 of these either-or questions, these linguistic presuppositional questions with a double bind, they're going to feel so good, they will start to recall actual decisions they made. Because when you recall a good decision, when you tell somebody else about some of your best decisions, that feels fantastic from an ego standpoint. And once they start to talk about some actual decisions, that will create this gestalt in their brain. And they will find a whole bunch of other decisions that we made, and you won't be able to get them to shut up. So before you ask about a specific decision, ask 2 or 3 or 4 of these presuppositional questions about decisions in general. That will kind of prime their brain, so to speak. They will remember specific decisions. And those specific decisions, when they flex their ego through the recalling of these fantastic memories, that will put them in a wonderful mood to make a good decision. And this is the ideal time to close them. And they will almost always go along with what you want them to do, because you're asking them to do something that they've just told you they're the boss when it comes to doing those same things. This is just one trick that you can use to become incredibly persuasive. If you want to learn a whole bunch of other tricks, check out the Persuasion Vault. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.